There's a lot of different kinds of horror. When people hear the term horror film, the first image that comes to mind is probably something gory, filled with jump scares and or lots of screaming. And some horror very much is this. But then there's the other kind. The quiet horror. The creeping horror. A horror that doesn't try to scare you by making you jump. The horror that instead exists to get under your skin. To make you sit in the uncomfortable dark by the soft glow of the screen and just feel weirdly uneasy. The film Creep is one of those horrors. Not to be confused with the Monster on the London Underground horror film of the same name, Creep is a 2014 found footage horror film carried by one of the most electric and terrifyingly uncomfortable performances ever put on screen. The movie follows a videographer named Aaron, portrayed by writer and director Patrick Bryce, who in need of money responds to an advertisement on Craigslist. The assignment requires Patrick to travel to a remote cabin in the woods where he meets Joseph, portrayed by co-writer and producer Mark Duplass, who requests that Aaron use his skills in videography to document this period of Joseph's life. Joseph explains that the reason for this task is that he is unfortunately dying of an inoperable brain tumour and may die before his pregnant wife gives birth to their child. The plan is that Aaron will help Joseph document a video diary so that he has something to give his child to remember him by after he's gone. A fair, if heartbreaking, request. Aaron takes Joseph up on his offer, but naturally, as this is a horror film, Joseph is not what he seems. Right from the get-go, Joseph is off. Not in ways that would immediately set off alarms, but there's just something uncomfortable about him. He remarks about Aaron's kind face with a smile that feels a little bolted on. He pushes for a hug in a way that doesn't feel exactly overly familiar, but doesn't feel natural either. It's an odd first impression, but immediately afterwards, kinda seems alright. As Joseph goes in depth about his history with cancer and how it spread throughout his body, his initial remission, and his tragic relapse, he just seems like a normal dude in a sad situation, only to then immediately ask Aaron to film him naked in the bath the second he's paid him, in a scene which is so strange and so awkward and uncomfortable that I don't even know how to explain it with words. This is the epitome of what Creep does and why it works so much. There are moments in this movie that are so uncomfortable and awkward that they make you squirm in your seat. You ever had an unnatural interaction with a stranger? Someone who may be just a little weird but otherwise harmless, but equally, you don't know them, they could also want to wear your face. I think everybody, and it's unfortunate to say especially women, definitely know the vibe I'm talking about here. I once had a stranger at a very empty metro station approach me to tell me in excruciating detail how he lost half of his head and his right arm, the whole time pointing to his clearly very intact head and arm. I once had a guy wandering up and down my mostly empty train carriage, occasionally screaming at me and the couple equally confused other people on the train, "Do you think gauze are cute?" and getting angrier and angrier and angrier at our lack of understanding of what he was asking us. To this day, I have not a single fucking clue what he was talking about. I once with a friend approached a crying stranger to check if he was okay, only to find out he was crying because he insisted he'd help make the original Muppets movie. This dude was my age. He most certainly did not do that. That film was out before he was born. And he was very upset that Disney had ruined his legacy with their at the time brand new reboot. He then proceeds to pull out pictures of Miss Piggy to show us that he just had on his person. I know that one sounds made up, but I swear it happened. And it's just those situations you're totally unprepared for, where you're like, what do I do here? How do I approach this? These bizarre, strange, unhinged, and uncomfortable social interactions that are so utterly weird as to almost be maybe even funny. Like, don't get me wrong, it's uncomfortable in the moment, it's odd, but like in a way where you don't know if you want to crawl out of your skin or laugh just to relieve some of the tension. Creep is a feature-length film of just sitting in that moment. The difference being, in those three stories I told you, I came out totally unscathed. Those guys were, in the end, just a little bit unusual, but otherwise all completely harmless. Well, maybe not the second fella, he was very aggressive and probably quite drunk, but that's besides the point. Creep isn't like those stories. Creep is like the stories I'm not sharing with you, the ones where the unusual but harmless stranger isn't so harmless after all, and the slow, bubbling realization that you really might be in danger. There's that little apologue everybody knows about the frog in the boiling water. You know that whole thing where it's like, if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump straight out, but if you put it in tepid water and then bring it to a boil slowly, it won't perceive the danger until it's too late? Creep is that. Joseph as a character is almost always uncomfortable, but he switches persistently between this uneasy weirdness to occasionally even being sorta interesting and fun. His early uncomfortable scenes are strange, and even, for a lack of a better word, cringy, but you could easily write it off as a man in a strange mental state due to his circumstances. And as weird as they can be, they're generally guided seemingly by some sort of sweet sentiment. A perfect example of this is found in one of the movie's most famous bits of iconography, when Joseph introduces Aaron to Peach Fuzz, a wolf character his dad supposedly made for him, who came with an accompanying song and dance, and
hello, my name is Peach Fuzz. I might look like I eat you up, but I'm as friendly as a rabbit, and I'd make a very good friend.
Well, what you... Imagine you're the dude filming this. But you see what I mean, right? Like, how good this film is at capturing that deep strangeness of an odd encounter. This scene's funny. In context, it's also kind of creepy, but I mean, look at it. It's doggy as all hell. This is comical. It's so awkward it becomes funny. But also, like, there's a real danger here in clear plain sight at the same time. That's not a friendly mask. The way Creep deftly navigates this delicate balancing act between awkward and funny to actually creepy gives such a unique and strangely familiar feeling that I've not really ever seen anything besides its equally fantastic sequel ever quite replicate. As Joseph builds his relationship with Aaron, you see the frog in the pot, and you want to warn them the water's getting hot, but the way the film drip feeds this transition into a much more obvious and clear danger than just the unique strangeness of the early scenes, you totally buy into why he doesn't just jump out until it's maybe a little too late. It makes for a really gripping and uncomfortable watch that, when you boil it down to its absolute core, is such an achievement, as the film is essentially just two people getting to know one another. The only other member of the cast besides Mark and Patrick is a small instance of a voice on a phone call. Other than that, these two have to carry the whole movie, and shockingly, they do so in a seemingly effortless manner. The duo were influenced by two-hander character dramas like Misery and My Dinner with Andre. This really shows as well in how well they keep the simple interaction of just focusing on these two, most of the time just in general conversation, and still manage to build this tight building tension. Patrick does really well to play Aaron with a kind of slow dawning realization that he is in way over his head, and reacts to all of the strangeness on screen with a believably honest bewilderment. But it has to be said, the real star of the show here is Mark. I truly believe without his take on Joseph, this film just would not work. He is crucial to this film's success. Everything he does, from how close he'll choose to get to the camera, how long and calculated some of his pauses are, how he smiles, how he overshares, how he carries himself. It all just paints such a vivid portrait of a deeply troubled individual without ever stepping over the line into cartoonish parody. Mark manages to make Joseph almost sympathetic at times, even after the point where you know he's lying. It's easy to see why the character of Aaron would be taken in by him despite how disturbed he sometimes comes across as. It's a truly phenomenal performance that should honestly go down in the horror history books. Everything about this whole production feels so effortlessly natural. Even the performance of unnatural behaviour, that you can't help but get swept up in the believability of this world. This is no doubt down to the way in which Mark and Patrick made this thing. It's a really interesting film when you look at the behind the scenes, as the crew is almost non-existent. There's some producer names attached, one of which doubles as the editor, some post-production staff, some sound artists and a visual effects guy, but the whole thing was put together with a very minimal amount of people, and it seems like Mark and Patrick did a lot of the heavy lifting here. Not only did they conceptualize visualize, write, produce, direct, and seemingly shoot the whole thing, but also a lot of their performance is totally improvised. Working from nothing more than an outline, they just sort of worked and refined the film as they shot it, which did end up creating a scenario where they had to really find the story in the edit, originally coming out with way too much material, and a lot of it more black comedy than what made it in the final cut. But it also gave them the benefit of finding this really natural tone for both of their characters that comes across wonderfully in the final product. The framing device of the found footage being video diaries and documentary as well gives the film a chance to bypass some of the more common problems found in the genre. Namely, there's little to no shaky cam this whole thing. They always manage to find a way to narratively keep the camera mostly steady, and the action framed in the center or using nice simple rule of third style framing. Despite this supposedly raw style they're displaying the narrative in as well, the filmmakers actually managed to get in some really nice visual storytelling and stylistically interesting shots. I absolutely love this shot of Joseph in the dark towering over Aaron being backlit by his porch light so he appears as only a black silhouette. It's not only visually compelling, but also at this point in the film really helps illustrate the danger Joseph represents and the power dynamics at play. Joseph is looking down, he has the upper hand. His blacked out face and body gives him a kind of disguise that doesn't portray any of his thoughts or feelings in the moment. It's impossible from this shot to tell who he is, or how he feels, or what his intentions are, which is basically the entire narrative sentiment of his whole character. It's great stuff. And man, as the film builds and builds, the unpredictable way in which it plays out is so gripping. Joseph is such an interesting character that you kind of get the feeling that even if you were in Aaron's shoes, there's almost such a curiosity with him, you could see yourself staying a little longer than maybe you should just to figure out what the hell this guy's deal is. It's great character drama, great use of found footage, seriously great horror, and oh man, I didn't even get into it, but the ending lands really strong. I'm not going to tell you how exactly, but I watched it with my girlfriend and she actually gasped. It was so effective. I wish I had time and space this month to cover the sequel as well, because honestly, it might even be better, but I thought it best to give you all a little look into the first entry so you can check it out yourselves, because if you're anything like me, the second you have finished this thing, you will immediately jump right into the next title. Here's hoping they eventually crack Creep 3, and we can have a really classic trilogy of modern horror on our hands. Anyway, that's another episode in this celebration of Horror Down, but before you go, let me just remind you all of this month's big announcements. This month's videos are in support of Trans Lifeline. 100% of ad revenue and my Patreon income for this month will be going direct to the charity, as well as all profits from the Drambles shirt. Mock-up design seen here, but the final print will feature a larger, high-quality screen print on organic, ethical shirts from one of the country's best suppliers. These are available to pre-order this whole month at the link in the description, and there should also be, of course, the donate buttons on this page if you'd rather make a direct donation. Also, unrelated to the Trans Lifeline charity efforts, did you know 2 other cool things are happening right now? Firstly, if I'm still in the competition at the time of this vid's release, I am running once more to be this year's Face of Horror. You can vote for me once every day for free, or buy more votes if you're so inclined, and doing so will help the B+ Foundation, which funds childhood cancer research. And finally, did you know that I'm actually a credited advisor on the next entry in the smash hit In Search of Darkness series? And no, I've never mentioned it. This incredible horror documentary saga is making its first foray into the 90s decade, and as an advisor, I'm able to offer a 10% discount on this film. I am genuinely thrilled to be working with the In Search of Darkness team. It's gonna be a banger. Check all this out and more at the links in the description below. Other than that, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my OnlyDance with the red button below. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next vid, and I will see you all again tomorrow.